Hello, my dear students. We are studying Labor Law second paper, and under that head, we are discussing the Payment of Wages Act 1936. Today, under the Payment of Wages Act 1936, we will discuss section 14 and we'll talk about the inspectors and the powers of the inspectors. This is video lecture number 16. And under section 14 of the Payment of Wages Act 1936, there are certain powers and the provisions for the inspectors are given under this act. Under section 14 subsection 1, an inspector of factories appointed under subsection 1 of section 8 of Factories Act 1948 and shall be an inspector for the purpose of this act in respect of all factories within the local limits assigned to the inspector. So an inspector of factories under subsection 1 of section 8 of the Factories Act 1948 shall be an inspector for the purpose of this act, and in respect of all factories within the local limits assigned to him, he would be acting as a inspector. This is subsection 1 of section 14 of the Payment of Wages Act. Subsection 2 of this section 14 states that the appropriate government may appoint inspectors for the purpose of this act in respect of all persons employed upon a railway, we are talking otherwise than in a factory, to whom this act applies. So appropriate government is authorized to appoint the inspectors for the purpose of this act in respect of all persons employed upon a railway. Means we are talking about otherwise than in a factory, and to whom this act applies. So this is subsection 2 of the Factories, I beg your pardon, section 14 of the Payment of Wages Act. That appropriate government may appoint inspectors for the purpose of this act in respect of all persons employed upon a railway to whom this act applies. Then under subsection 3 of this section 14, appropriate government may by notification in the official gazette appoint such other persons as it thinks fit to be the inspectors for the purpose of this act, and may define the local limits within which and the class of factories and industrial or other establishment in respect of which they shall exercise their functions. So appropriate government by notification in the official gazette appoint such other persons as appropriate government thinks fit to be the inspectors for the purpose of this act, and may define the local limits within which this and the class of factories and industrial or other establishment in respect of which they shall exercise their functions. So other persons, if the appropriate government feels, thinks, things fit to be the inspectors for the purpose of this act, then other persons may also be appointed as the inspector for the purpose of this act. And definitely means the local limits within which these inspectors would be functioning, that may be defined for those factories or those industrial or the other establishments. This is subsection 3 of section 14. Now we talk about the inspectors. What inspectors can do under section 4. So we can see these are the powers of the inspectors also, right? Section 4 clause A states that inspector may make such examinations and inquiry as inspector thinks fit in order to ascertain whether the provisions of the act, the rules of the act made thereunder are being observed properly. So this is what an inspector may exercise, may examine, may inquire, right? And will ascertain that whether the provisions of the act or the rules are being properly observed or not in that particular establishment, in that particular industrial establishment, right? And section 4, clause B, is said that the inspectors are authorized with such assistance if any the inspector thinks fit. The inspector may enter, inspector may inspect, inspector may search any premises of any, railway, factory, or industrial or other establishment, any reasonable time for the purpose of carrying out the objects of the act, right? So within the reasonable means at any reasonable time, you can say the whatever assistance inspector thinks fit may take that assistance and can enter into the premises, can inspect, can search any railway, factory, or industrial establishment at any reasonable time for the purpose of carrying out the object of this act. So this is what inspector can do. And under this section 4 clause C state that inspector may supervise, an inspector may supervise the payment of wages to persons employed upon any railway or in any factory or industrial or other establishment. Section 4 clause D, an inspector may require by a written order the production of such place as may be prescribed of any register, any record maintained in pursuance of this act. So the inspector may require by a written order the production of at such place any register, any record, or any statement of any person which he may consider necessary for carrying out the purpose of this act. So this is what inspector can do. And if we talk about another clause, clause E of this section 4, then we find that I mean, so we are talking about section 14, subsection 4, I beg your pardon, subsection 4 and clause E. So under this section 14, subsection 4, clause E, an inspector may seize or take copies of such registers or documents or portion thereof as he may consider relevant in respect of an offense under this act, which he has, a reason to believe has been committed by an employer. So an inspector may seize those copies, may seize those registers, may seize those documents, or maybe the portion of those documents, those registers or copies, right? He may, the inspector may consider relevant in respect of an offense under this act, and which for which he is having a reason to believe that this has been committed by the employer. So inspector can do so. Inspector can seize or take the copies of such registers and documents or their portions, if whatever he feels necessary, he can do, right? Or relevant in respect of any offense under this act. Now we talk about the clause F of this section 14, subsection 4, clause F. An inspector may exercise such other powers as may be prescribed, and provided that no person shall be compelled under this subsection, no person shall be compelled under this subsection to answer any question or make any statement tending to incriminate himself. So there is no compulsion, right? And section 14, subsection 4A, the provisions of the Code of Criminal Procedure 1973 shall, so far as may be, apply to any search or seizure under this subsection, as apply to any search or seizure made under the authority of a warrant issued under section 94 of this Act Code, right? So this is subsection 4A of section 14. And subsection 5 states that every inspector shall be deemed to be a public servant within the meaning of the Indian Penal Code. So every inspector shall be deemed to be a public servant within the meaning of Indian Penal Code. And means under one more section is there, section 14A, where the facilities to be afforded to inspectors. Every employer shall afford an inspector all reasonable facilities for making an entry, inspection, examination, supervision, inquiry under this act. So employer shall afford an inspector with all reasonable, facilities for making any entry, any inspection, any supervision, any examination or inquiry under this code. So this is all about section 14, my dear students, where we have seen that the inspector of factories appointed under subsection 1 of the section 8 of the Factories Act 1948 shall be an inspector, and for the purpose of this act, an appropriate government may appoint inspectors for the purpose of this act in respect of all persons employed upon railway to whom this act applies. And also the appropriate government under subsection 3 of section 14, we have seen that appropriate government may by notification in the official gazette appoint such other persons as it thinks fit to be the inspector for the purpose of this act. And an inspector may make such examination and inquiry as he thinks fit. He may take assistance as he thinks fit, can enter, inspect, examine the factory, railway or the industrial establishment. An inspector may supervise the payment of wages to the persons employed upon any railway or in factory or in industrial establishment. And inspector may require by a written order the production of such at such place as may be prescribed of any register or record maintained in pursuance of this act. An inspector may seize or take copies of such registers or documents or portions thereof, whatever he may consider relevant in respect of an offense under this act. And an inspector may exercise such other powers as may be prescribed. And every inspector shall be deemed to be a public servant within the meaning of the Indian Penal Code. And at last we have seen that, I beg your pardon, that every employer shall afford an inspector all reasonable facilities for making any entry, inspecting, supervising or examining the inquiry under this act. So this is all about for today's deliberation, my dear students. I believe this deliberation will help you. Just go through the slides and refer the direct also. Thank you so much. Have a nice time. Take care. Bye-bye.